So, good morning. What a privilege to be able to kick off the first high-level plenary of this year's conference. Climate in the crosshairs, security, scarcity, and power in a warming world. As climate change intensifies, it's redrawing the map of global security. It's redefining how states, how nations, how communities understand power, cooperation, and risk. And today we bring together voices from Europe, from major powers, from the Horn of Africa, and from the humanitarian sector to explore how climate-driven risks are challenging old paradigms that perhaps don't serve us anymore, and how we can build new ones, rooted in equity and inclusion and real leadership. Our speakers today will offer perspectives from major powers, from the perspective of climate-affected communities, and from the humanitarian sphere. And I hope that in this conversation we can be quite frank and bold and really address some of the risks that we're facing in this political context that we're in, the risk of climate action being subsumed by perhaps the challenge that the State Secretary mentioned of us being subsumed by short-term security interests, the urgent triumphing over the long term, as well as exploring some opportunities for forging a more peaceful and sustainable future ahead of COP30 and beyond. So let me introduce our panel. To my left, I have His Excellency Ambassador Anthony Agotha, the EU Special Envoy for Climate and Security, a climate champion, instrumental in shaping the European Green Deal and integrating climate security into the EU's foreign policy. Then we have His Excellency Lieutenant General Bashir Mohammed Jama, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Somalia, Somalia's highest-ranking military officer and a member of the Federal Parliament of Somalia. And then we have Eva Svoboda, the Director of International Law and Policy of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, who brings operational experience from Myanmar, from Iraq, from Algeria, from the East Timor, to name just a few, as well as insights into legal frameworks and the humanitarian perspective. So I think a really great and diverse set of insights. I'd like to get straight in and start at the strategic level. Excellency Minister Bashir, I'd like to start with you. We sometimes talk about these risks as a conceptual, as a theoretical issue, but Somalia sits at the front line of climate security. It's sometimes spoken of as the poster child for climate security risk. It's not simply something for the future. Climate change poses an immediate existential threat in terms of the relationship to displacement, to resource scarcity and conflict, demanding urgent attention. Can you tell us, how is your government integrating at the strategic level climate change into national security strategies, and also conflict and conflict sensitivity into climate strategies? Yes, please. Here, this is your microphone.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank to German government and the organizers of this platform in inviting me this podium. I'm happy to be here in Germany, where I have been trained when I was very young. And today, in my retirement age, maybe very soon, I'm happy to be here. And I say, Dankeschön, Bundesrepublik Deutschland. And going back to the question, Somalia has integrated climate risks into national security strategies through governance, policy, and operations. The Ministry of Environment and Climate Change has been established to connect climate policy with security, stabilization, and disaster risk management. Policies such as the National Transformation Plan and the NDC 3.0, which we are really very proud to be one of those countries, especially in Africa, submitted its NDC 3.0, embed climate resilience into development and security agendas, prioritizing vulnerable communities and ecosystems. At the operational level, climate risks are integrated into early warning and response systems to protect critical infrastructure during extreme events. Environmental crime control, such as enforcing the UN ban on Somali charcoal exports, is also linked to security operations to address environmental degradation and resource competition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. That is a very impressive commitment. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think perhaps Somalia was the first to integrate so comprehensively conflict sensitivity into its NDC, so really showing leadership there. I'd like to then come to you, Tony. The EU has also shown some leadership in this space, I think. The EU's evolving security doctrine now includes or integrates climate as a central risk, influencing, in principle at least, foreign policy, defense, and multilateral engagement. So in 2023, we had the EU Joint Communication on Climate, Peace and Security. Can you tell us, apart from this being a beautiful document on paper, can you tell us what this actually looks like in reality? How, if at all, is security actually reshaping, or climate change reshaping the bloc's approach to foreign policy and security, and particularly when it comes to strategic alliances and partnerships with climate vulnerable regions?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I also want to commend the German State Secretary for an excellent speech. I think Germany shows, again, what it means to be guided by science and led by democracy, and I think that's very important. And the same goes for the EU. Now, first, if you allow me, I want to put a few principles on the table. There is still an old traditional way of thinking that climate action is to protect the planet, that defense is there to protect your borders, and that industrial policy is to protect your economy. It's old thinking and it's wrong. We need to connect all of those together, and it's very difficult because it's complex, because our organograms of organizations are not organized as such. What's also a problem, that we're in a cycle, and we're not a trend, but we're in a cycle where the political rhetoric sometimes offers one a false choice, that either the question is, do you want to go broke, go green and woke? You want to be prosperous, free and happy? Double down on brown. It's a false choice, because in fact, to be competitive, to create jobs, to protect your public's health, to defend your security interests on a range of issues, you have to go through the transition. And if you look at the numbers globally, the transition is happening. Forget about the rhetoric. Since 2015, we had renewables in the world around 18,049 gigawatts. Now, apparently, that's more than 4,400 gigawatts, 140% increase. The investments in 2024 into renewables was 2 trillion. Into fossil fuels, still 1 trillion, which is too much. But the 2-to-1 ratio shows where it is. And renewables have become so much more cheaper. So if you look in the past years, the average cost of solar panels have decreased by 68%. Onshore wind by 59% and offshore by 49%, if I'm correct. At least a lot cheaper. So I think that's very important. What about, I just said, don't mistake a cycle for a trend. The transition is happening. In the EU, we are staying the course. Yes, guided by science, led by democratic debate. There's a democratic debate. Why? Because some are stepping out, some are stepping back, and some are domineering the area with unfair trade and production practices, and we have to guard ourselves for that. So as we speak, the European Council will have this discussion. How do we go forward? But if you read the letter that's been leaked, so you can find it online, by President von der Leyen to the European Council just the other day, please read it. It shows the way for the EU, for competitiveness, for security, is the clean transition. Our latest joint communication that came out last week, it's the joint communication on the climate and energy vision, is exactly that. It's about competitiveness and it's about security. And then my last point, in that joint communication, there's a paragraph on defense where we acknowledge, listen, as we are boosting our clean transition and boosting our competitiveness, we need to have a strong defense posture. We see the Arctic melting, sea lanes opening up. We see the scorching heats in the Sahel, where outside rogue elements want to come in, exploit for their own gain. We see the extreme weather events wreaking havoc on our societies and our military infrastructure. We need to do something about it. Not just to make our military resilient, but also to make it effective in the, unfortunately, as a deterrent or in the battlefield of the future. On-site energy is a point. If you look at Ukraine, what they're doing with their innovation cycles, how quickly they're following up, they're putting in wind turbines. They don't say we want to save the planet, even if I would like them. But they're putting it in because it decentralizes an energy system. It's more difficult to target. So all these new thoughts with quicker cycles of innovation, not 20 years for a fighter jet, but quick. This is the new thinking. And I hope today we can do it. Sorry for being long, but I wanted to put those things together.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. And really, really inspiring to hear this. I was also trying to think of a new little rhyming phrase, but I couldn't. We don't want to go broke if we go green and woke. But I was surely there's something we can all come up with collectively to show how security, freedom, and prosperity is pegged to a green transition and climate action. That rhymes. We can get there. I think by the end of the day, we'll check back in. Over to you, Eva. Great to hear from the minister and the ambassador how this looks at the strategic level. Let's come down to the human level. The ICRC witnesses firsthand how these climate impacts are exacerbating humanitarian crises, and then these are impacting the most vulnerable people, communities in fragile contexts the worst. And yet humanitarian law and diplomacy are being stretched by these crises. And we require a new, innovative, principled action and responses to safeguard these vulnerable populations. Can you tell us, again, at a strategic level or at an operational level, how is the ICRC adapting its humanitarian diplomacy and its legal frameworks to cope with these new risks, these compounded risks at the intersection of climate, peace, conflict, and insecurity?
Thanks, and thank you also for the invitation to contribute to this panel. And yeah, I don't have anything to rhyme, but maybe at the end of this panel we come up with something. When you introduced me, you said humanitarian organization. So indeed, the ICRC is present in over 100 different contexts, responding to needs of people affected by armed conflict. And just to give you a statistic, so recently we counted 130 armed conflicts. That's significantly more than only 10 years ago. And so that should make us pause and think. And so why I'm linking this now to climate change. It matters to us because we work with communities who are at the front line of climate change. Those countries that are affected by conflict are also the least ready to adapt to climate change. And so we see that every day. Climate change does not directly cause conflict, but we do see that the compounding effect of climate change, environmental degradation, and conflict can raise tensions. And especially in areas where you have weak governance, where you don't have institutions that can respond and make communities resilient, then that can create certain dynamics of violence within and across borders. We've already heard that climate change does not stop at the borders, so we have to think also transregionally. Just to give you maybe a couple of examples, the desertification and conflict in the Sahel, for example, pushes herders and their animals towards greener and safer areas. But that, of course, has then an impact on areas that are far away from where they actually came from. And so these changes in transhumance patterns are fueling violence between these various communities. Now, Janan, you asked about adapting. At the ICRC, and I would say that a number of different, or more generally the humanitarian sector, has been thinking over recent years how to adapt its programming and make it more climate informed. So our aim is not just, in a sense, to respond to the impact of conflict, but also to ensure that we take into account the growing climate risks. This includes working with states, development actors, including also the financial development banks and other humanitarian organizations, to think about climate risks in conflict settings. For now, we see there's a mismatch between severe vulnerability to climate risks of countries in conflict and the support that they receive. In fact, the more fragile a country, the less climate finance it receives. There's an associated risk, and so a risk aversion to invest in climate financing, in particular in vulnerable places. And so if we zoom into a more local level, the more fragile a specific area within a country, the more neglected it is. And again, just to give you a couple of statistics, so we try to reach those who are in the most difficult areas to reach. And by our accounts, there are about 204 million people who live what we call contested areas. So these are either they are contested between states and non-state armed groups. So 74 million people live in places that are fully controlled by non-state armed groups, and 130 in contested, and 204 million overall. Now, despite the growing commitments, again, we see that climate finance is not really where it should be. And maybe my last point now, more on the legal side, because you asked about this. So the mandate that the ICRC has stems from the Geneva Conventions that are bedrock of international humanitarian law. Now, international humanitarian law does not speak about the environment per se, but what it does, or about climate change, in 1949, the drafters didn't think of that. What they did think about, though, is the environment. And so IHL, international humanitarian law, does have provisions to protect the environment. Why? Because people depend on it for their survival. And so we often discuss with states, with non-state armed groups, with policymakers about how they can integrate these provisions into their own domestic legislation to better protect the natural environment. And perhaps I'll leave it here for now.
Thank you so much. And I think some of the points that you've made and gaps that you've flagged in climate finance, it will be some really great food for thought for the panels immediately after this on climate financing for fragile states. So thank you for setting us up there with some of the challenges that we're facing. You've also brought us right down to the very kind of real human face of this. And let's now look at some of these real-world examples. Back to you, Minister Bashir. Can you share with us some of the concrete examples of how climate-induced resource pressures, such as water scarcity or food insecurity, have shaped patterns, not just of conflict, but maybe also of cooperation in Somalia? Very often we think of kind of human security and then this hard security trade-off. But in Somalia, I think this is really understood as a continuum, and maybe you can share with us what lessons we can learn from Somalia and Somalia's experience of tackling this as a continuum of soft through to hard security.
Thank you once again, Anne. In Somalia, climate pressures have led to both cooperation and conflict. During the 2023, what we call their season floods, various actors worked together using climate data to mitigate the impact. While in 2021-2023 droughts caused displacement and fuel disputed over resources. You see, sometimes in Somalia could be a living example of what is happening on climate change issues. You see communities who are assisting each other when it's about flooding. Communities helping other communities to rescue, to assist, because some people don't even know how to swim, others are rescuing them, so on and so forth. On another season, when droughts come, then you see same people fighting because of the scarce resources they have, like water and grass. So, and also the illicit and charcoal trade has also contributed to insecurity in Somalia. But enforcing bans and providing clean energy alternatives can help reduce both emissions and conflicts. Overall, addressing climate stress can lead to both conflict and cooperation, as I have mentioned. And in international support ahead of COP30 could strengthen resilience and peace in the region, especially in Somalia. Because Somalia, as I said, is really, you see, when you are there, in 6 months, 4 months or so, we are suffering for flooding. And another 4 or 6 months, you are suffering for droughts. And that is directly related to the climate change. So it's one nation, one community, people are suffering for climate change, I can say, is Somalia and other people who are living in same conditions. So, and our experience in that field is really can teach and can be really an experience in all those and people, governments and organizations who are willing and standing beside these communities to assist and to contribute to overcome this and man-made disasters. Because what we believe in is that climate change is not coming just for and what we call force majeure. No, it's created by humans, and it's killing and damaging and destroying by other human beings. So togetherness, I think we can solve the problem, starting from the emissions producers like the developed world and recipients and victims of these disasters like my country and other people who are suffering for this. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Goodness. So, Tony, you sit here next to Minister Bashir and you hear how urgent, how real these challenges are, and then you're back in your European space where there's increasing climate skepticism, pushback, kind of increasingly populist politics where climate is seen as woke and not for now. So how, given these risks that are so real, so urgent, how do you reconcile this with the very real risk that climate action is being subsumed by Realpolitik, this climate skepticism, this populist politics across so many member states in the EU? And how do you ensure, or what can the EU do to ensure that this doesn't undermine ambitious and urgent climate action, especially as we're kind of moving towards COP30?
Well, thank you. First of all, I just want to underline the profound truth that His Excellency just said. The most vulnerable who are also the least to blame for human-made climate change, are bearing the hardest brunt. It is something we feel deeply in the EU. It's not a beauty contest, but it matters, the fact, especially in this world. The EU is the biggest global donor to climate finance and does its best to help where it can, but it's not enough. So much more has to be done. Now, to your question, which is very pertinent, and maybe let's start by words, because words matter. You spoke about climate skeptics. Now, I'm a skeptic in general of everything because, as I said, I want to be guided by science. And if the evidence changed, so my conclusions have to change. But I suspect that you imply by climate skepticism, climate denial. So I would call it climate phobe. I mean, we don't have xenoskeptics in our society either. So words matter, because otherwise the framing is that's very rational to say that, well, whether climate is human-made or not is still a question. I think that's the first thing. In this new political environment where social media and algorithms reign supreme, unfortunately, and we come in our bubbles and our echo chambers, one of the first victims is shared truths. We don't always have to agree what we do with shared truths, and we can have fierce democratic debates on policies and answers. But it is pretty fundamental to our democratic society to have shared truths. And if they no longer exist because others who do not want to convince you but want to confuse you throw in alternative truths and alternative facts, then the dialogue breaks down. So I don't have an immediate answer, but what we try to do in the EU is to say, listen, we need to rekindle the importance of science. And if somebody goes out there through foreign information manipulation or interference, and this FIMI, there's a lot of this disinformation going out there, deliberate, trying to undermine our societies and our policies, whether it comes from Russia, it could come from others, we have to, where we can, state our own position as clearly and convincingly and courageously as we can. We don't have the monopoly on truth, but science is the best guide we have. This is what the science says. And here lies in a problem. Because if you tell people the real truth about what the science is telling us, and unfortunately every year science is becoming more it's becoming more scary, basically, on what's happening. There's a risk that people are despairing. So you have to be truthful to your citizens, but if you put them into despair and they shut off and they don't want to do anything because they think, I don't know, it's too big, that's also a problem. So you also have to show, but it can be done. We have technology. We have skills. We have people. There is even money, even if it's not enough. It is there. What it takes is political courage to do it. If we can connect it with competitiveness and security, we can do this. And to people at home, what can I do? Well, no step is too small. No step is too small. And I once had a group of students from the US, and I asked, who eats meat every day? All hands went up. And I said, okay, well, what about eating meat every other day, not every day? I'm American, I need to have my burger. I said, yeah, but if you do it one day and one day not. So I'm not telling you to eat grass or live in a cold cave, but just small changes. Cumulatively, that can be huge. So we will have to change our lifestyles, but it could lead to a better world with cleaner water, with fresher air, with healthier soils that grow our food, with greener cities that can cool down. I mean, we have to visualize a potential future, and we have to have that imagination that it can be better. But right now, again, that false choice is between you impoverish yourself through a transition or you just do the same what you always did and you'll be happy. And it's false and it's untrue. It's dangerous because the costs of not acting are insurmountable.
Thank you. Shared truths. I think it's very compelling to hear you, but can I ask you, we are in, I think I used words matter, and I think I used the word Realpolitik. We seem to be in a time of interest-based politics or over values-based, but what I hear you describing is driven by kind of moral conviction, what's ethically right. Can you, we need narratives, we need compelling narratives based on business cases, on the right political messages. Can you share with us some of, what does this look like?
So you said moral. I think morality is always part of the narrative. We are humans. Why? Who are we? Why are we here? There's something more than just to have a great day, have food. There is more than that. But second, there's also logic. And if we can connect this, this moral imperative with the logic of, hey, we gotta grow our trade. We cannot do it alone. There are two sorts of states in the world. Small states are states who do not know yet that they're small. Because we're all in the same vessel. So you gotta connect it to interests. That's fine. I have no problem with that. I want our trade to prosper. I would like free trade. I want it to be fair. The EU is reaching out to everyone. We might be boring as the EU, but when you see us, it's what you see is what you get. The rule of law reigns in the EU. We're open for trade if it's free and fair. We want to help where we can. But so connected to interest, that's fine. But you won't find us coercing anyone. So the narrative, again, coming back is, forget about saving the planet, how much I want to save the planet. It's about jobs, it's about health, it's about security. These are hard interests that actually should bind us all.
Thank you, back to you, Eva. From the humanitarian perspective, the ICRC is trialing and really doing a lot at the operational level. And can you share with us some of the approaches, some maybe new approaches or tried and tested approaches and legal tools that show promise in really reaching these communities that you've described, how you're helping these communities stay resilient in the face of these security threats linked to climate change. And in this space that we're in, where multilateralism is really being squeezed, how can some of these solutions be shared and expanded globally? What kind of operating mechanisms are there that don't rely on maybe multilateral structures that don't really serve us so well anymore at a time where, say, the UN system perhaps is under increasing strain? What other channels are there for us?
Thanks. I actually wanted to build on something that you said, Minister, and that's cooperation. Mm-hmm. So not only does climate change not directly lead to conflict, but evidence suggests that it actually leads to cooperation. And we've had examples of that, where communities who are affected, they frequently use a way of finding solutions to a problem that they have. And so one example that we found was in Iraq, where there were tensions around specific water points. Now, communities came together because they said, well, we don't want these tensions, so can we find some kind of solution that allows us to access the water and reduce the tensions that go with it. So increasingly, we also do see that shared concerns in relation to climate and the environment help communities and countries engage in a practical dialogue over the management of risks and resources. And I think what's important here, and I think both of the speakers before have mentioned it, that must happen on a local, regional, and global level. The other point I wanted to make is that implemented programs that integrate long-term environmental and climate risks in the design of activities in rural areas help also reduce competition for land. So in the Lake Chad region, we tried to do that. And we worked together with the communities, and I think that's a very important point, and I think you mentioned it as well, Minister. It's the affected communities who have to have the lead on this. So we work with local communities, authorities, and experts to develop activities in support of agro-pastoral and farming communities, again, because we know that there are tensions, and so they have to work together. By rehabilitating land eroded by rains, flooding, and winds, and again, by doing that, we hope to reduce the tension that comes with scarce resources. I think it's important to also, and I think both of you touched upon that there are a few common and perhaps obvious characteristics to programs that are effective. And as often is the case, common sense isn't necessarily common practice. And these are the following. They must be context specific. they must be sensitive to social dynamics, and they must be grounded in understanding of the differentiated impacts of climate change. Because climate change doesn't have the same impact everywhere in the same way on different communities. So this is key to avoid fueling tensions or exacerbating the vulnerability of parts of the community. So we often call it conflict sensitivity. It's a word that's being used a lot, but again, it's critical that we understand what we do has an impact on the communities. And while I think we all do some kind of harm, I think we need to ensure that we do the least amount of harm possible. Now, you asked about, can all this be scaled up? Not always. It can when there are centralized institutions, when there's a stable government, but in highly unstable environments, smaller scale programs are actually just as worth. And on a local level, that's important. Sometimes they can be expanded in a more meaningful scale, but just because they cannot, they should not be discarded. Again, what it is required is states, climate change and development actors, all of us working together, and I think both of you also mentioned that as well. And maybe a final note, we often speak about transition, inclusive development, empowering communities and people, but I think what is really important is that our success should be measured by whether the most remote, most insecure, most vulnerable communities are supported wherever they may be.
Thank you so much. And I think so often we're in these conversations of trying to find things that are scalable because everything needs to be big. And I think it's really great to be reminded that just because something is small and localized and not scalable doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. We should just find better ways of being able to finance this. So great to hear this again. And also great to just be reminded of the need to understand the importance of conflict and context sensitivity in whatever we do. Whatever we do can do harm, but how do we do the least possible harm? Thank you so much. I think we're coming to the end of our time. And to wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you to share just one thought, one final sentence. If in your current positions right now, what would you do to ensure that climate security strategies and operations can bridge this continuum of trying to achieve global stability and also address some of the need, in one thought, in 30 seconds, the needs of the most vulnerable communities. We'll start with you, Minister Bashir.
One sentence?
Yes, please. Yes.
Let us go from words to action. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Very good.
Mine is a bit longer. If we want to reach communities in fragile contexts, we need access. And access can only be given if we have the environment for humanitarian organization. That requires political will.
Political will. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, you challenged me.
Yours has to rhyme.
If life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is your ambition, then get in, loser. Embark on the clean transition.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So thank you so much to the panel. I think climate change is, what I've heard in this conversation is that climate change is really forcing a redefinition of security. It's moving us from a state-centric, more military-focused set of ideas to more human-centered. Absolutely, I'll come back to you. To more human-centered, climate-resilient, conflict-sensitive approaches. And at the same time, we're hearing how politics and geopolitics are pulling us in the absolute polar opposite direction. And I think this conversation really shows us that there is a lot that we can do. We really need to grasp the nettle and accept the political reality that we're in, find the narratives, find the shared truth amongst us. And whilst climate-related risks can fuel conflict and fuel competition, we've also heard how it can also, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It can also bring opportunities for collaboration and shared solutions and perhaps even a better multilateralism. So there is a lot that we can do. I think it's really important to remember that the path ahead of us right now lies in resisting this reducing of climate risks to security threats alone, and really seeing this as a multi-sectoral, multilateral and kind of multi-sector, multi-level approach, really grounded in principled action and context, contextual knowledge. So thank you so much to our speakers. Maybe Minister Bashir, your announcement.
Thank you. I just want to announce, as the State Secretary has mentioned here, that Somalia is from now an official member of this forum. Thank you very much.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. What a great note to end on. And thank you to Minister Bashir, to Tony, to Eva Svoboda for your insightful conversations. This has really set us in set the foundations for a great rest of the conference, leading us to our next plenary. We go straight in to a conversation on climate financing for peace and stability. And I now hand over the baton to my friend and colleague, Almut Wieland-Karimi. I can't see you. And the floor is yours.